Good People by David Foster Wallace. They were up on a picnic table at that park by the lake, by the edge of the lake, with part of a downed tree in the shallows half hidden by the bank. Lane A. Dean Jr. and his girlfriend, both in blue jeans and button-up shirts. They sat up on the table's top portion and had their shoes on the bench part that people sat on to picnic or fellowship together in carefree times. They'd gone to different high schools, but the same junior college, where they had met in campus ministries. It was springtime, and the park's grass was very green, and the air suffused with honeysuckle and lilacs both, which was almost too much. There were bees, and the angle of the sun made the water of the shallows look dark. There had been more storms that week, with some downed trees and the sound of chainsaws all up and down his parents' street. Their postures on the picnic table were both the same, forward kind, with their shoulders rounded and elbows on their knees. In this position the girl rocked slightly and once put her face in her hands, but she was not crying. Lane was very still and immobile and looking past the bank at the downed tree in the shallows and its ball of exposed roots going all directions, and the tree's cloud of branches all half in the water. The only other individual nearby was a dozen spaced tables away, by himself, standing upright, looking at the torn-up hole in the ground there where the tree had gone over. It was still early yet, and all the shadows wheeling right and shortening. The girl wore a thin, old, checked cotton shirt with pearl-colored snaps, with the long sleeves down, and always smelled very good and clean, like someone you could trust and care about, even if you weren't in love. Lane Dean had liked the smell of her right away. His mother called her down to earth and liked her. Thought she was good people, you could tell. She made this evident in little ways. The shallows lapped from different directions at the tree as if almost teething on it. Sometimes when alone and thinking or struggling to turn a matter over to Jesus Christ in prayer, he would find himself putting his fist in his palm and turning it slightly, as if still playing and pounding his glove to stay sharp and alert and center. He did not do this now. It would be cruel and indecent to do this now. The older individual stood beside his picnic table. He was at it, but not sitting, and looked also out of place in a suit coat or jacket and the kind of men's hat Lane's grandfather wore in photos as a young insurance man. He appeared to be looking across the lake. If he moved, Lane didn't see it. He looked more like a picture than a man. There were not any ducks in view. One thing Lane Dean did was reassure her again that he'd go with her and be there with her. It was one of the few safe or decent things he could really say. The second time he said it again, now she shook her head and laughed in an unhappy way that was more just air out of her nose. Her real laugh was different. Where he'd be was a waiting room, she said, that he'd be thinking about her and feeling bad for her, she knew, but he couldn't be in there with her. This is so obviously true that he felt like a ninny that he'd kept on about it, and now knew what she had thought every time he went and said it. It hadn't brought her comfort or eased the burden at all. The worse he felt, the stiller he sat. The whole thing felt balanced on a knife or wire. If he moved to put his arm up or touch her, the whole thing could tip over. He hated himself for sitting so frozen. He could almost visualize himself tiptoeing past something explosive. A big stupid-looking tiptoe, like in a cartoon. The whole last black week had been this way, and it was wrong. He knew it was wrong, knew something was required of him that was not this terrible frozen care and caution. But he pretended to himself he did not know what it was that was required. He pretended it had no name. He pretended that not saying aloud what he knew it to be right and true was for her sake, was for the sake of her needs and feelings. He also worked dock and routing at UPS on top of school, but had traded to get the day off after they decided together. 2 days before, he had awakened very early and tried to pray, but could not. 2 days before, he was freezing more and more solid, he felt like, but he had not thought of his father or the blank frozenness of his father, even in church, which had once filled him with such pity. This was the truth. Lane Dean Jr. felt sun on one arm as he pictured in his mind an image of himself on a train, waving mechanically to something that got smaller and smaller as the train pulled away. His father and his mother's father had the same birthday, a Cancer. Sherry's hair was colored and almost corn blonde, very clean, the skin through her central part pink in the sunlight. They'd sat here long enough that only their right side was shaded now. He could look at her head, but not at her. Different parts of him felt unconnected to each other. She was smarter than him, and they both knew it. It wasn't just school. Lane Dean was in accounting and business and did all right. He was hanging in there. She was a year older, 20, but it was also more. She had always seemed to Lane to be on good terms with her life in a way that age could not account for. His mother had put it that she knew what it was she wanted, which was nursing and not an easy program at Peoria Junior College. And plus, she worked hostessing at the Embers and had brought her own car. She was serious in a way Lane liked. She had a cousin that died when she was 13, 14, that she loved and been close with. She only talked about it that once. He liked her smell and her downy arms and the way she exclaimed when something made her laugh. He had liked just being with her and talking to her. She was serious in her faith and values in a way that Lane had liked, and now, sitting here with her on the table, found himself afraid of. This was an awful thing. He was starting to believe that he might not be serious in his faith. He might be somewhat of a hypocrite, like the Assyrians and Isaiah, which would be a far graver sin than the appointment. He had decided he believed this. He was desperate to be good people, to still be able to feel he was good. He rarely before now had thought of damnation and hell. That part of it didn't speak to his spirit. And in worship services, he more just tuned himself out and tolerated hell when it came up, the same way you tolerate the job you've got to have to save up for what it is you want. Her tennis shoes had little things doodled on them from sitting in her class lectures. She stayed looking down like that. Little notes or reading assignments in Bic and her neat round hand on the rubber elements around the sneaker's rim. Lane A. Dean, looking now at her inclined head's side barrettes in the shape of blue ladybugs. The appointment was for afternoon, but when the doorbell had rung so early and his mother called to him up the stairs, he had known, and a terrible kind of blankness had commenced falling through him. He told her that he did not know what to do, that if he was the salesman of it and forced it upon her, that was awful and wrong, but he was trying to understand. They prayed on it and talked through it from every different angle. Lane said how sorry she knew he was, and that if he was wrong in believing they'd truly decided together when they decided to make the appointment, she should please tell him, because he thought he knew how she must have felt as it got closer and closer and how she must be so scared, but that what he couldn't tell was if it was more than that. He was totally still except for moving his mouth. It felt like she did not reply. That if they needed to pray on it more and talk it through, then he was here, he was ready, he said. The appointment could get moved back. If she just said the word, they could call and push it back to take more time to be sure in the decision. It was still so early in it. They both knew that, he said. This was true, that he felt this way, and yet he also knew he was also trying to say things that would get her to open up and say enough back that he could see her and read her heart and know what to say to get her to go through with it. He knew this without admitting to himself that this was what he wanted, for it would make him a hypocrite and a liar. He knew, in some locked up little part of him, why it was that he'd gone to no one to open up and seek their life counsel. Not Pastor Steve or the prayer partners at campus ministries, not his UPS friends or the spiritual counseling available through his parents' old church. But he did not know why Sherry herself had not gone to Pastor Steve. He could not read her heart. She was blank and hidden. He so fervently wished it never happened. He felt like he knew now why it was a true sin and not just a leftover rule from past society. He felt like he had been brought low by it, humbled, and now did believe that the rules were there for a reason, that the rules were concerned with him personally as an individual. He promised God he had learned his lesson, but what if that too was a hollow promise from a hypocrite who repented only after, who promised submission but really only wanted a reprieve? He might not even know his own heart or be able to read and know himself. He kept thinking also of 1 Timothy and the hypocrite therein who disputeth over words. He felt a terrible inner resistance but could not feel what it was that it resisted. This was the truth. All the different angles and ways they had come at the decision together did not ever include it, the word, for had he once said it, avowed that he did love her, loved Sherry Fisher, then it all would have been transformed. It would not be a different stance or angle, but a difference in the very thing they were praying and deciding on together. Sometimes they had prayed together over the phone in a kind of half code in case anybody accidentally picked up the extension. She continued to sit as if thinking, in the pose of thinking, like that one statue. They were right up next to each other on the table. He was looking over past her at the tree in the water, but he could not say he did. It was not true. But neither did he ever open up and tell her straight out he did not love her. This might be his lie by omission. This might be the frozen resistance. Were he to look right at her and tell her he didn't, she would keep the appointment and go. He knew this. Something in him, though, some terrible weakness or lack of values, could not tell her. It felt like a muscle he did not have. He didn't know why. He just could not do it, or even pray to do it. She believed he was good, serious in his values. Part of him seemed willing to more or less just about lie to someone with that kind of faith and trust. And what did that make him? How could such a type of individual even pray? What it really felt like was a taste of the reality of what might be meant by hell. Lane Dean had never believed in hell as a lake of fire or a loving God consigning folks to a burning lake of fire. He knew in his heart this was not true. What he believed in was a living God of compassion and love and the possibility of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, through whom this love was enacted in human time. But sitting here beside this girl, as unknown to him now as outer space, waiting for whatever she might say to unfreeze him, now he felt like he could see the edge or outline of what a real vision of hell might be. It was of two great and terrible armies within himself, opposed and facing each other, silent. There would be battle, but no victor. Or never a battle. The armies would stay like that, motionless, looking across at each other and seeing therein something so different and alien from themselves that they could not understand, could not hear each other's speech as even words, or read anything from what their face looked like, frozen like that, opposed and uncomprehending for all human time. Two-hearted, a hypocrite to yourself either way. When he moved his head, a part of the lake further out flashed with sun. The water up close wasn't black now, and you could see into the shallows and see that all the water was moving, but gently this way and that. And in the same way, he besought to return to himself as Sherry moved her leg and started to turn beside him. He could see the man in the suit and gray hat standing motionless now at the lake's rim, holding something under one arm, and looking across at the opposite side, where a row of little forms on camp chairs sat in a way that meant they had lines in the water for crappie, which mostly only your blacks from the east side ever did, and the little white shape at the row's end, a styrofoam creel. In his moment or time at the lake now, just to come, Lane Dean first felt he could take all in whole. Everything seemed distinctly lit, for the circle of the pin oak's shade had rotated off all the way, and they sat now in the sun with their shadow, a two-headed thing in the grass before them. He was looking or gazing again at where the down tree's branches seemed to all bend so sharply just under the shallow's surface, when he was given to know that through all this frozen silence he despised, he had in truth been praying, or some little part of his heart he could not hear had, for he was answered now with a type of vision, what he would later call within his own mind a vision or moment of grace. He was not a hypocrite, just broken and split off like all men. Later on, he believed that what happened was he'd had a moment of almost seeing them both as Jesus saw them, as blind but groping, wanting to please God despite their inborn fallen nature. For in that same given moment he saw, quick as light, into Sherry's heart, and was made to know what would occur here as she finished turning to him, and the man in the hat watched the fishing, and the downed elm shed cells into the water. This down-to-earth girl that smelled good and wanted to be a nurse would take and hold one of his hands in both of hers to unfreeze him and make him look at her. And she would say that she cannot do it, that she is sorry she did not know this sooner, that she hadn't meant to lie. She agreed because she wanted to believe that she could, but she cannot, that she will carry this and have it. She has to. With her gaze clear and steady, that all night last night she prayed and searched inside herself and decided this is what love commands of her, that Lane should please, sweetie, let her finish, that listen, this is her own decision and obliges him to nothing, that she knows he does not love her, not that way, has known it all this time, and that it's all right, that it is as it is, and it's all right. She will carry this and have it and love it, and make no claim on Lane except his good wishes and respecting what she has to do. That she releases him all claim and hopes he finishes up at PJC and does so good in his life and has all joy and good things. Her voice will be clear and steady, and she will be lying, for Lane has been given to read her heart, to see through her. One of the opposite sides, Blacks, raises his arm in what may be greeting or waving off a bee. There is a mower cutting grass someplace off behind them. It will be a terrible last-ditch gamble born out of the desperation in Sherry Fisher's soul. The knowledge that she can neither do this thing today nor carry a child alone and shame her family. Her values blocked the way either way. Lane could see, and she has no other options or choice. This lie is not a sin. Galatians 4:16, have I then become your enemy? She is gambling that he is good. There on the table, neither frozen nor yet moving, Lane Dean Jr. sees all this and is moved with pity, and also with something more, something without any name he knows, that is given to him in the form of a question that never once in all the long weeks' thinking and division had even so much as occurred. Why is he so sure he doesn't love her? Why is one kind of love any different? Why is one kind of love any different? What if he has no earthly idea what love is? What would even Jesus do? For it was just now he felt her two small, strong, soft hands on his to turn him. What if he was just afraid, if the truth was no more than this, and if what to pray for was not even love, but simple courage to meet both her eyes as she says it and trust his heart?